Hi, I'm Chuck Lewinick. I'm a reenactor. And for 36 years, I used my hobby on the weekends of historical reenactment to bring the subject to life for my students in the classroom and to try to lure them into the idea that history can be pretty cool. Well, I'm not in the classroom anymore, and I still have a room full of garb at home that I can't bear to get rid of just because I think it's really cool. And I still have this passion for bringing the past to life, which is why I taught history. And I have this desire to play history detective. So I kind of repurposed myself after I got out of the classroom. And I decided that since I didn't get to actually teach about California history due to curriculum requirements, I would pursue that. Okay, first stop, the missions. Well, then studying the missions, that turned into also tracking down the assistencias that used to exist, the spin-off missions. And I go looking for the remains of them, or maybe I would just find a plaque, or sometimes I wouldn't even find the plaque at all, just the stand that the plaque was supposed to fit in. And that led to me going to Russian California as well. And that also turned into another side project where I discovered there were bandidos and outlaws hanging out in saloons that were established inside desecularized missions, which was kind of a mind-blowing thing. And so I started tracking down different outlaws, different bandidos, and following their paths. And that led to stagecoach robbers, and that led to train robbers, except that something had to trigger people robbing trains. And that's when I learned about something called the Mussel Slough Tragedy. So I'm headed to the county that produced the most train robbers out of any county in the United States, and the first real conflict in California between the Southern Pacific Railway and settlers. And I hope you stick with me on my journey. After the Mexican War and after the United States had annexed California, the first European settlers to come into what's going to be Tulare County are farmers. They're homesteaders. They're coming in with their covered wagons. They want to get land. But what's going to end up happening is, of course, some of the land is going to be set aside for certain purposes. Like, hey, if you want a settlement to actually grow, you're going to need something like a stage stop or a stage depot. Okay, well, that's going to happen in about 1859. The Butterfield Stage Company will start establishing stage depots. They had like a route that was 2,800 miles long from St. Louis to San Francisco, and there were 139 stops where horses could be changed and where people could get fed. And two of those were in Visalia and in Porterville. And okay, that's great. Towns are starting to grow. But now, in the early 1870s, the railroads come in. And that's going to really determine whether a town grows or not. When the Southern Pacific Railway came in, they were establishing where the tracks are going, and they're establishing where their depots are going to be. And you have places like Alila, which will later change its name to Early March. You will have Goshen, Travers, and these various places are getting established. Hanford, Lemoore. All right, tracks are going here and there. Okay, where there's going to be a depot, the town's going to grow. Well, Visalia is not getting a depot at first. Part of that was because the Southern Pacific made certain demands, and Visalia didn't give in right away. So they decided to punish Visalia by not extending the rails there. A few years later, the Southern Pacific acquiesced, and the rails extended from Visalia to Goshen. So now Visalia is connected to the rest of the world, so now the people of the city don't have to panic. Now remember, I said that the railroads had some of the land set aside for them. Also, there are people coming into Homestead. Well, what's going to happen is there's going to be a deal made. People could homestead the lands, improve the lands, and they usually could buy the land for like about $2.50 an acre. It depended upon what was on the land, and but that was usually the going rate, and seemed to be an arrangement that worked. Well, what ends up happening though is the Southern Pacific decided, oh no, the homesteaders, or what they were calling very derisively the sandlappers, they were going to have to pay somewhere between $11 and $40 an acre. And a lot of the settlers couldn't afford this. So you have a whole bunch of people that are really upset. Well, if these people aren't paying for the land they're occupying, got to get them out. So what would end up happening is you would have the Southern Pacific sending in their own agents and sending in marshals and probably hiring some locals, and they're removing people from the property. Well, on May 11th, in 1880, what ended up taking place was something called the Mussel Slough Tragedy. And what ended up happening is there was a U.S. Marshal, or U.S. Marshal's deputy, there was a Southern Pacific agent, there were a couple of locals, and what ended up happening is they came to this place and they were starting to evict people. Well, about 20 of the settlers show up and they're really, really angry. And what ends up happening is a fight ensues, and 2 people from the Marshal's party are killed. 2 people, or actually 5 of the settlers are killed. By the way, fun fact, on the plaque here, it says 2 U.S. deputies were killed. No, but there were people from that party. Okay, so what ends up happening is 17 people are indicted. A number of those are found guilty. They are fined $300. They are going to be put in jail for a few months, but their wives were allowed to accompany them to jail and live there with them while they served their sentence. Now, this incident really gets journalists fired up. Newspapers are cranking out story after story. And this corruption that people felt was taking place, within corporations like Southern Pacific, this was the ammunition for the muckrakers. And you would have newspaper stories coming out about how evil, the Southern Pacific was, or how evil large corporations were. And there were people writing novels. A real famous one was The Octopus, A Tale of California. And then there was another one that was written called Blood Money. And a third, First the Blade. And people are getting really passionate, really wound up when they're reading these books. And the railways become easy targets, easy villains to write about. Thus ends the Mussel Slough Tragedy in 1880. A year later, there was an attempt to rob the Central Pacific Railway, which failed. And in 1889, there's going to be the first successful train robbery, and it's going to be against the Southern Pacific Railway. It'll take place in Pixley in the southern San Joaquin Valley, and it'll be conducted by the two outlaws that I was originally researching for this, Chris Evans and John Sontag. I hope you stick with me on my journey as I track those two.